Legit Therapy Show on Law FM 103.9. I'm still your host, Dr. Jibs, and with me in the studio is Olawale Abe, the head of corporate services at the Freudian Center, our sponsor for the Legit Therapy Show. Thank you, Mr. Wale, and thank you to the Freudian Center for your continued support of our show. And with us is Mr. John Adewale Dosumu, our legal expert this morning.
Thank you.
Today, the topic of conversation, or topic that we'll be discussing today, borders around a conversation that was, or a statement that was made on the floor of the Senate. And it goes, and I quote the statement, it says, "Why should we support something that makes people mad?" That was a statement that was made on the floor of the Senate when three House members, namely Benjamin Kalu, Olumide Babatunde, and Miriam Onoha, pushed for a bill to decriminalize cannabis. So I believe that there's a difference between the word decriminalization and legalization. So to decriminalize something means that you take off the gravity of the implication or the weight of committing that offense. So right now it's a crime to cultivate cannabis in Nigeria. It's a crime to use and distribute cannabis in Nigeria, and if you're caught with a certain amount, quantity or kilogram, you're likely to face certain jail time. So Mr. John will be able to give us more information on the weight of the punishment that comes with it. So you're faced with certain penalties for cultivating, using or distributing. So to decriminalize means that you take off the gravity of that penalty and make it very minimal. So we say you change it from a criminal offense to a civil offense. So if initially it was that you'll be jailed for 10 years if you are caught growing cannabis on your farm, now we'll say you just spend 2 nights in jail and go home. If you are caught smoking or caught with a bag of cannabis and you're going to be locked up for 3 months, now you just spend 48 hours, greet the policeman,
counseling,
and go back home. or you be counseled and go. So that's what decriminalization means. Now, to legalize cannabis now means that you make it readily available for everyone. So anywhere you go, there will be, or around the country, if it is legalized, there will be shops like how you have your lata on one side, you have your pharmacies on one side. You can now have cannabis shops where you go in and they're selling different types of cannabis, like how you go into a pharmacy. So in countries where cannabis has been legalized, you walk into a shop, you have an array of different strains of cannabis on the table with different contents, and then you get to choose what you want, like a prescription. You pay and you come out. So that's legalization. So there are two different entities. Now the bill, we don't know the content of the entire bill, but we know that the heading was decriminalization of cannabis. So I'll just backtrack a bit into cannabis as a substance. So it's like cannabis is a substance that has existed for many years. It's a natural, in Nigeria it grows naturally on our soils. It's not like that all over the world, but in our climate it's one of those crops that just grows naturally. And the most common strains will be the cannabis sativa and the cannabis indica species. But the plant itself is been made very common because of its psychoactive properties. We are very familiar with the term Igbo, and Colorado or Colos or Loud, or Arizona, those are all different strains or species of cannabis. But the one that is peculiar to us here, which is what we call Igbo, has a very strong smell, very, to us, quite potent, because you smoke it, immediately the eyes turn red, the lips get darker, and you can identify that smell anywhere, anytime. Especially when you cross those bus stops, you can smell it anywhere, anytime. But there are other strains, more synthetic variants that come from other countries. We have from Canada. So as a country too, everything in Nigeria is imported. We import toothpick, we import everything. So it is with our cannabis. We import cannabis as well. An importing nation when it comes to everything and anything. For some reason, people import cannabis as well, but the strains that are brought in from other countries where they're not naturally grown, So there are more synthetic variants. The seeds have been modified, and in those situations, because the seeds have been modified, you don't get that smell that you typically get with the home locally grown cannabis. So this, you get quite now people smoke cannabis and there's no smell whatsoever. Someone can smoke cannabis with you, or smoke something called Colorado with you in the house, and you have no idea that there's someone smoking in the house because it has no smell. And you still, nowadays you see people that smoke weed and you still see they have pink lips, and you are wondering, how does he have pink lips with it? Yeah. Because they're smoking other variants, from Canada, from Ghana, from all over the world. There are more synthetic variants, and I believe that's what's practically pushing the conversation at the Senate now, because they're saying, okay, you see, you refuse to grow it in Nigeria. People are now importing it like how they import toothpick as well, and making those countries rich. But we as a country grow this thing naturally as a natural crop here, and we refuse to grow it here. So that's the conversation we want to have. Is it wise for us to say, okay, because it grows naturally here, then we should explore it for revenue purposes? Yeah. Or do we just leave it as an illegal trade and allow people to continue to bring it in? I'll delve more a bit into that as we progress in the show. But I must state that in terms of cannabis now, the two active ingredients in cannabis, we have the delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, which is the substance in it that makes you high, that you smoke, that makes you high. And then we have the cannabinoids as well, with the CBD. I'm sure you've gone around and you see some bottles called CBD oil. They squeeze it and convert it into oil, and that's the medical cannabis part, which is used for people with seizures. So seizures that don't seem to respond to medical tabs or drugs. CBD has been offered as an alternative. People with cancer that really doesn't have a cure and there's untreatable pain, people have used CBD oil to also manage that, and so many other things. People explore it for so many other issues as well. I can't verify how effective it has been, but it's something that is currently ongoing around the world. So the difference is that in terms of medical cannabis, now the difference is that in terms of that THC, the delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, it varies in percentage across different strains. So some strains might have 20% THC, some will have 90% THC. So you know that the more THC the strain has, the likelihood of it getting you high is there, But the less the THC content, the more likely it is to be used as medical cannabis, because then the more active ingredient is the CBD, which is more medical inclined. Yes. So that's what you see in places like Canada. When you walk into a shop, they would have quantified this particular one 20% THC, 80% CBD. This one 90% THC, 10% CBD. So depending on what the person wants to use it for, the person is able to choose what it is. My goal is to be high. I want to go for something with high THC. If my goal is to treat an illness, I will go for something with a higher CBD. So that's where the world has gone in terms of that. Now, in terms of countries that have decriminalized and legalized, we are very aware of the Americas and the Canadas, the Australias, the Netherlands, and all the West. But we're Africa. This is Africa, so we can't copy everything that goes on the West. But the truth is that it's now coming to Africa. So in terms of Africa now, we have 4 countries that have jumped on this wagon now. We have South Africa, that has decriminalized. We have Morocco. Wow. We have Lesotho, and is it Malawi or one other country?
Morocco, very surprising.
Now, the funny thing is that it has been decriminalized for cultivation. So they can now plant, but not for use, for personal use. So if you're a farmer in those countries, you can plant cannabis. The government can visit your farm. You would have been given the license to plant 10 hectares of cannabis. You're not to exceed 10 hectares and blah blah blah. When they visit, you're keeping to the rule, no problem. But if you now start, you are smoking in public, you go in front of a policeman and smoke and say, "Shibi, you have decriminalized," you'll be arrested.
Straight up.
Because it hasn't been decriminalized for personal use, only for cultivation.
Okay.
So that's where there's a caveat in African, like in the West, where some countries have just done decriminalize and legalize, free for all, use as you like, So that's the difference. I just want to throw my question now at our legal experts and just tell us a bit about how bills are made into laws. What's the process? How does it go? Because I'm aware that when the man stood up and said, why should we support something that makes people mad? Everybody just kept quiet and like, wahala, this thing has entered another level, and they stepped down the bill for another day.
Yeah.
But I believe it's gone through 2 hearings, and the next should be the public hearing. I'm not really familiar with the legal terminology, so I'll just leave it to Mr. John to take us through that.
All right, thank you very much.
Yeah.
So, quite a few things that you mentioned earlier, but I'll start with the process for making laws in Nigeria and then circle back to some of the items you already touched on. So, generally, for passing laws in Nigeria, how do you make new laws in Nigeria? A bill is typically what it's called. A bill is read on the floor of the National Assembly. Now, how do you start off with that? So basically, the bill has a sponsor. Now, it could be a private citizen, it could be the executive, which could be the presidency, or in the case of states legislature, it could be the governorship, but it is always sponsored by a 7-member of the legislative house. So if it's a private citizen, he would either go through his rep or his senator, and then the bill would be sponsored by that honorable member of the house and read on the floor. So when the bill is properly sponsored by a 7-member of the house and read on the floor, it's presented for the first reading. The first reading is where the bill is introduced, and with a vote on it in the house, and if somebody seconds it, then the house would step it down for the second reading. So at the second reading, it gets a little more technical, and then they begin to debate the pros and the cons, and at the end of the day, if they agree that yes, it has merit and they want to move on to the next stage, then they vote on it again. If it passes the vote, then it's stepped down to the committee stage. So at the committee stage, every technical issue arising, how will it conflict with existing laws, what's the impact on the public, every single technical issue is now up to the committee to sort out. And usually the committees from time to time, they throw this open and invite stakeholders through public hearings where affected stakeholders, interested stakeholders will come in, give their submissions. Everything would be taken on board, properly considered, and then harmonized. Now, at that point, the committee is now tasked with making sure that this bill is ready for the public. So it goes on to the third reading. Once it passes the committee stage, the committee will report back to the House, and then it's opened up for the third reading. At the stage of the third reading, they vote on it again, and if it's passed by the House, if it's a bill sponsored in the House of Representatives, for example, if it's passed there, then it's sent to the Senate, where it goes through a similar process where they look through it. Now, once both houses harmonize their positions and are ready to present that bill, they send it up to the president for his assent. Now, the president has a certain time frame by the constitution within which he can either assent to the bill or withhold his assent and give his reasons why he's not assenting to the bill. Now, where he assents to the bill, that bill becomes law. It's passed already, and it becomes, once it's signed by the president, it becomes law and it's gazetted, and that is the law, and the enforcement agencies can begin to act on it. If the president withholds his assent, the bill is sent back to the legislative houses, and if by a majority of 2/3 vote of both houses, the Senate and the legislature, they vote to pass that bill into law, then that bill still becomes law, even though the president objected to it.
Interesting.
But it's very difficult to get a 2/3 majority of both houses, so it has to be a really critical, pressing issue that the diverse spectrum of the country agrees on for it to pass. So the idea is just checks and balances, so that all the power doesn't reside with the president. It's just a check on the executive powers. So that's the overall general process. Likewise, a bill that starts up in the Senate too, after going through the process, would also go to the House of Reps and go through the similar process, and then the assent stage.
So why is Nigeria making this consideration at this time? Is this the solution to our problem at this time? And I'm just wondering, is this the right time for this type of law? But before we go on to answer that, I'll just open the phone lines, and the numbers to call or WhatsApp or text are 0703 2277 338, 0703 2277 338, or 0909 555 1039. 0909 555 1039. Please join us and share your views on this bill and the potential implications of the bill. So back to where we were at, I was just wondering, is this the right time for this? Are we ripe for such a bill? Yes, South Africa has done it, Morocco has done it, Lesotho has done it, but is Nigeria ripe for this type of bill? I'm really concerned because of our healthcare system. With every bill or every policy, there are pros, there are cons, there are also unintended consequences as well. You weigh what is good, what is bad, but there are some consequences that will come along the way as byproduct of your bill. Are we ready for it? So if we empower farmers if we empower people to farm, but we've been trying to get the youth to farm anyway. Nobody wants to farm. That's okay. Go and farm cannabis. Maybe some people might be interested in farming. But then once we increase the supply, are we ready for the potential unintended consequences that will come with that? I believe the consequences will be heavy on our healthcare system, especially our mental healthcare system, as well as maybe our legal system. But I'll just because I'm a mental health practitioner, I'll focus on our mental health care system as it stands today. In terms of healthcare funding in Nigeria, only 3% of the funding goes to mental health care, and the belief is that 3% all goes to tertiary hospitals. So the psychiatric hospitals across the country, across the geopolitical zones, just divide that money amongst themselves. They use it for salaries, for capital projects and whatever within those facilities. Nothing goes to the private sector. Nothing goes to prevention. Nothing goes to drug. Nothing goes elsewhere. That's just where so you just believe that just send money to the asylums or the psychiatric or asylums in quote, because they used to be asylums, but just send money to the big tertiary hospitals and then you're sorted. That's where there's a big problem. So we see that the field is not moving. We're not progressing as we should. We're not progressing as quickly as we should because the funds are not enough. Number one, the funds are not being directed as they should. They're not being disseminated in the right direction. They should be more widespread. Public sector, private sector, NGOs, pharmaceuticals, across, there's a large ecosystem when it comes to mental health. Not just the clinical side, the prevention side. We even have allied services in terms of housing, in terms of jobs, in terms of childcare. There's so much linked to mental health care, welfare service. Yes, there's an ecosystem, but you see that the entire ecosystem is not being fed. It's just a particular sector that is being fed, and it's just 3%. Now that particular law has not been modified, or that constitution, I don't know the legal term to use for that one now. That one has not been modified though. So you go and decriminalize cannabis and you're still giving your 3% to only the psych. There's going to be chaos. There's no doubt. There's not going to be chaos because truly, with the fact that farmers are going to be more empowered, farming is going to be more lucrative. More people go into farming. Farmers will now start to make more money. They will now start to export their own. So not only are we consuming Canadian loud and Ghanaian loud and South African loud and all that, people will now be consuming Nigerian Igbo in other countries. They will now be consuming Nigerian Igbo in other countries. But then that's where the revenue generation comes in. So as a country now, it won't just be talking about oil money anymore. We'll be talking about oil money. We'll be talking about cannabis money. How else do we generate our income again? And it's oil and nothing else, I guess.
The way Nigeria is structured, even if the government thinks that they could only legalize the export of this product, some will still spill into the society.
Of course, now. So the supply increases. Yes. So that's what I was going to. The supply increases. So now revenue increases. You are exporting now. Now, because there's more in supply, more people will be interested. So I was able to come across several studies done in places, countries where it has been legalized, and it's been seen that with the legalization of these drugs, with cannabis, young people, especially young males who might be going through psychological distress and are not regular users of cannabis, have been shown or are more likely to start to use when they are going through one challenge or the other. So I'll take that again. You have a young man who has never smoked cannabis before, but because he's now going through a psychological distress, and because cannabis is now legal in his environment, he will now consider cannabis as a potential solution to his emotional problem. In the past, he might have gone to see a doctor first, but because it's now legal, he will go to cannabis as a first option because it's now legal. So that's where we really need to ponder on. Are we ready for that? Because when young people now, adolescents are now going to cannabis, they will no longer come to the pharmacy again. No, our health seeking behavior in Nigeria right now is, I have a headache, I go straight to the pharmacy first. Pharmacist will tell me what to take first. If pharmacist that doesn't work, I'll now go to the doctor. The case will now be, I have a problem. My first point of call would be the cannabis seller first. I will go to a cannabis shop first. Cannabis shop doesn't work, I will now
big trouble.
Go to pharmacy second. Pharmacy doesn't work, I will now go to hospital. But the problem in this case now, because of the downside we see with long-term use of cannabis, especially among young people, research has shown that when people start to use cannabis early at a very young age, and if they smoke heavily, within 5 years of use, they come down with drug-induced psychosis. It's been widely researched and it's a known fact. So you start early, you smoke heavily, give it 5 years, there will be a psychotic illness. And that has led to the increase in the prevalence of psychotic illnesses we've seen amongst young people. In the past, it was very far. It wasn't a common thing, for you to see people go psychotic, or in layman's term, run mad. It was very far-fetched. It was one in 1,000, 1 in 10,000. But now, because of drug-induced psychosis, is now more rampant. Now, we find this young man that has considered it as his way to treat his emotional problems, start to smoke, now ends up in a mental health care system that is not really functioning, that is understaffed, because the brain drain clearly affects our sector. That's even the mental health sector is even the area that is most drained, because the West has a big need. They've legalized on their side. Now they have a big need for mental health professionals. So they are dragging all the mental professionals from Nigeria and the African countries. Where are we going to find the professionals to manage these people when the complications come?
Mr. John, do you think the legal profession or the legal experts will embrace this bill?
Well, like I said, it's an interesting one. And when we started the show, I mentioned that nothing is all bad and nothing is all good. So yes, there are quite a number of very significant fears with the effects legalization of cannabis would have on the larger society. For example, there have been studies that show that marijuana, cannabis, is a gateway drug. Basically, a drug that introduces the user to more debilitating, more potent hard drugs. So for people who typically abuse cocaine, heroin, and all whatnot, research has shown that a lot of them started from abuse of cannabis. Now, bringing it back to the legal aspect of it, if it's properly done, if it's properly legalized, there are some positive impacts that can come from this, which is why if this bill or these bills, because there are actually two different bills in the House that are seeking to do the same thing, one to amend the Nigerian Drug Law Enforcement Agency Act of 2004 to achieve the same effect, and one seeking to decriminalize cannabis. It's just the name that is different. The content is essentially the same for the two bills. Now, if it's properly done and they throw it open to the public for a public hearing at the committee stage, you would now be able to get important stakeholders, the mental health sector, the health sector, the criminal justice system, and then different areas would be able to harmonize the different benefits. For example, if the possession of cannabis is decriminalized in Nigeria, there's a there's a great burden lifted off the police and our court system, because the police arrest a lot of these people and they're taken to the courts. The courts are burdened by case after case where you have them dealing with possession of cannabis, and in between all of that you have pressure on the prison system as well. So if this is taken out, that is a pro on that side. Now you begin to worry about the mental health impact. Again, I'll go back to some of the examples I cited earlier.
But are you aware of the concept of the drug courts? Drug courts. So these other countries that have legalized cannabis have what they call drug courts. So those courts attend to strictly cases around drug use, drug possession, and all that.
Again,
which we don't have, I believe.
Again, you see, law is in a constant state of development. So with new legislation comes new regulations, new enforcement policies, and new adjudication systems in which you deal with these different issues that may arise.
So the question is, are these things in the bill? Because the bill is not readily available to the public.
Precisely. So
are these things in the bill?
When is the bill out? Don't you think it should circulate and let people already start commenting?
That's what it should be like.
Again, it comes down to the administration. If you go to the National Assembly website, you would see that there's a section there where bills in the Senate and in the House are listed. Unfortunately, it's not up to date. It's not up to date. So ordinarily, this is something that you should be able to access easily. You should be able to get it without having to jump through hoops. Now, not getting it, there's always recourse to the Freedom of Information Act, where you would now specifically write and then hope to get an answer within the specified time. If you don't get the required answer, then you will have to go to court to compel them to. There's an entire process in
for
the
a
freedom
bill
of
that is supposed to be passed to
So-
help you and serve you.
again, administration. Now, like I said, if it actually gets through the first and second reading and comes to the committee stage, it's very easy at that point for the National Assembly to throw it open and let people actually see this, and then let the interested stakeholders, affected stakeholders, all come in and give their relevant comments. Because law is made for man, not man for law. At the end of the day, good or bad, we will all be affected by this bill if it becomes law.
Yes, true.
So what are the questions that come to mind? Will there be increased criminal activity? In Lagos, we know what it's like when you're driving home from Lagos Island to the mainland and you're stuck in traffic, and you're like, is this the day I'm going to get robbed in traffic? You know, thankfully we see the police, you know, they've stepped up, and you see them at some of the known black spots. But really, how many policemen do we have? Can they cover the entire stretch? And for these boys, it's like guerrilla warfare. When you're looking at the boys that perpetrate these crimes and the police are large and visible. The criminals would strike and run, come out of the bushes, hit one vehicle, run, you know, avoid the police patrols. So yes, credit to the police where it's due. They're doing a huge lot to reduce this, but the truth is, it's not enough, because they just don't have the resources.
So there's a lot more. We
There's a lot
need to
more
even infuse
that we
tech
need to-
in crime fight. We need to
Exactly.
So even infusing tech to help fight crime should even be part of that bill. Because if we are afraid that crime rates can go up, what kind of tech gadgets can we infuse to be able to identify criminals
Again,
The federal
and
government
help
introduced
boost?
CCTV cameras in Abuja. I heard they moved everything out. You know,
Really?
Yes, no.
But we have in Lagos, we
a
have
lot of
cameras
that
in Lagos too.
We have a
Have
lot of
cameras,
CCTV
but
cameras.
they're focused on traffic offenders.
It's work in
and
progress,
stuff
because
like
you
that.
start from traffic, but the same information, when properly integrated with the security agencies, will be
Can
very
help.
useful.
Yes, very
Very
yes,
useful.
Yes. So there's a lot that needs to go, and I don't think it's a bill that should be hush and quietly passed, because there's a lot that's going to go into it. You know, they say.
And we can also learn from the example of the Netherlands, unlike Canada, where every strain is available. The strain available in the Netherlands is typically very low in THC, the psychotropic content. So you don't have that mental health worry. Secondly, it was when I unfortunately had to use Cafegot for migraine some years back that I found out that there are prescription drugs in Nigeria that you can only get at the pharmacy with a doctor's prescription.
Oh, yes.
So even if it's thrown open to the public, are these some of the measures that will be there? Yes, we have cannabis stores, but can you legally purchase from them without a doctor's prescription?
Yeah.
So these are some of the things that should go into that kind of bill. And then, or is it majorly for export? In which case you're looking at revenue only.
So the truth is that there are farms that exist currently, but they are tagged as, NDLA will tag them as illegal. So once NDLA finds these farms, they always burn them down.
Good.
You understand? I'm sure these farmers are protesting.
They should burn more.
I'm sure these farmers are protesting.
So again, you have that heavy impact on the NDLE, who don't have enough resources to cover all of that. If you legalize it, these people will come out and register. And then you export it. Let the people out there who want to use it for whatever, let them use it. And then you stem the flow. It will also help to stem the flow into our own society.
So in a nutshell, I believe the aim of this conversation is to get our lawmakers to understand that we need more, the healthcare system needs more attention. That's just what I'm just trying to push. The healthcare system in general and the mental health care system. Thank God in December 2022 the president passed the mental health
bill,
law, into law. You know, thank God, that's a good place to start. But now if we're looking at other things that can have mental health implications, there needs to be increased funding in the sector. There needs to be more support for the sector. We need more mental health facilities. We need more trained personnel. We need these things on ground before we start to put more kerosene in the fire. You know, we need these things on ground. We need to empower our criminal justice system with tech. You know, he just said the police cannot be everywhere. They are not enough. But once we put certain gadgets in place, a criminal comes out from under the bridge and runs back under the bridge. The camera picks him. He can be identified. There's so many things that need to be put in place before we start to copy other countries, you know,
advanced countries.
Other advanced countries. Certainly, Morocco is quite advanced. You know, South Africa is quite advanced. They have smaller populations. We are 200 million Nigerians. We need to really sit down and deliberate on these issues. So, if you know a friend that knows someone at the National Assembly, or please tell them that they need to get people like us on board to sit and deliberate on the content of this bill, because at the end of the day, they say when everyone's sitting in a canoe and the canoe capsizes, everyone gets wet. It's not the people at the front or the people at the back. Everyone is going to get wet. So if the bill is not properly designed, and when it's passed into a law, the unintended consequences outweigh the pros, we are all going to feel the impact. Even the lawmaker himself is going to feel the impact. So let's have this in mind. And on this note, you know, we've come to the end of the show. And we'll be here again next week, Wednesday by 10 a.m. to discuss another pressing issue. Thank you.